Hello and welcome everybody to the JavaScript Notebook, where we are learning the basics of JavaScript in order to integrate that into our projects going forward. This is for my Foundations class, and anyone that's coming along on the channel, welcome. And again, where we left off, let's go to table of contents. We had originally introduced the JavaScript language and talked about 4 of the most common data types of the 8 that exist for JavaScript. We then spoke and took a look at the method in which we store basic digital information, and that was in variables and arrays. And we also had a conversation about what made up a computer, and that was 4 ideas. The fact that you could input digital information, the fact that you could store it, process it, and then output that processed information in some fashion. Now, we talked about the storing a little bit. There's still a lot more to do on that. But right today, we're going to be looking at the method of processing that and something called functions. So let's head on over to our friends at W3 Schools. And, whoops, here we go. So I'm at the main page of W3 Schools. I'm coming down to learn JavaScript and heading down to functions. Okay. And JavaScript functions is simply a block of code designed to perform a particular task. A function is executed when something invokes it. Okay. Sounds simple enough, but this is a massively powerful tool, probably one of the most important items or technologies within any programming language, and that's the ability to write a little bit of code or a lot of code in one block, give it a name, and never have to write it again, but you could refer to it as many times as you like. And we could make that function dynamic because we could put parameters in which are placeholders for data, and when we do call on that function, we could replace those parameters with arguments and actually fill in those temporary placeholders. And voila, you're calling on the function. It's dynamic, but you're not writing the program repetitively. And this falls under something called the dry concept in programming, DRY. Do not repeat yourself. So this is the method to do that. We define a function one time, we give it a name, and then we call on it as many times as we want. So let's come on over to our Cloud9 IDE and let's actually pick up where we left off. Let me scroll over here. Make sure that you are closing out of your terminal pane down below. I only have my index file and style file open, and I'm going to come over to my drop down and open up functions.js. Okay, once I have that, I'm going to scroll over to give myself a little bit more real estate, and let's come on down here and let me refresh your memory here a little bit. I never could spell this right. Console.log. And this should seem or sound familiar from prior modules in the notebook. Console.log is, the .log part is a function. We've been using this all along, and we might pass in something that says hello world. And now, passing in is a method or a way in which we are calling on the function log, and we are telling log what we would like to use in that block of code. Now, many times there's block of codes in libraries that we never will see, nor do we need to see, but we know it exists, we know what the function does based on documentation, and we just use it. So let's see if we could do that here. Console.log and hello world. I'm going to come over to my preview on the big screen here, refresh the page, and remember console is in our dev tools, so I've got to open up inspect. You could also do this in the REPL, and I'm going to come over to my console page here, and there it is. If I refresh the page, there's my console.log coming in at hello world. Okay, so that's one method. And let me actually refresh your memory a little bit deeper here. Console itself, notice the green, that is an object of the JavaScript engine. Specifically, It's actually an object of the window object. So the window object's kind of the overriding parent. And that window object represents an open window in a browser. So, given that it is an object, we're going to come down and notice all of the other objects within window are here, and there is console. If I click on that, I clicked on it a little too much. There we go. So here's the console object. And the console object provides access to the browser's debugging console. And notice down below, the fact that console is an object means that there are pre-written methods or functions that come along with that inside of every browser. And one of them, see right down here, is log. So notice the names of the methods are log and then parentheses, info and then parentheses, clear and then parentheses. And that parentheses indicates to JavaScript number one that that name belongs with a function, but it also allows for the flexibility to pass arguments in. Okay, so I want to highlight another function that we haven't used yet, but I want to make you aware of that. There is something called alert within the window object as well. Let's click on that. And alert just allows us to display an alert box to the window. So let's see if we could use that. Here, I am going to comment out of console.log, and I'm going to come above that, type in alert, and notice again in this snippet, parentheses are required. And inside of the parentheses, we're going to put hello world, and then end our thought with the semicolon, save that, and I'm going to come back to my preview, close out of my dev tools there and refresh my screen, and there is the alert. It comes up in kind of a box here, and that's not coming up on my screen here, so give me a second. Okay, there it is. So it just comes up on the very top of the screen with hello world, and if we type something else in, greetings, you would see that as well. So this is the function. The two functions were alert, and alert has different programming language in or a recipe or algorithm within the block of code. It simply allows us to see the box pop up in a modular form. Console, the .log function allows us to see a display in the console in the dev tools. So that is kind of what functions are. So let me actually okay, so I've just commented out of alert, and we brought back console.log again. And let's change this up a little bit. If I put in something called greeting and then parentheses after. Now, notice JavaScript right now, based on the colorization, is saying, hey, that's a user-defined word. And I don't see anything about that yet. So I'm going to just put here, we are invoking or calling the function greeting. Now, in order for this to actually do something, JavaScript needs to actually see the recipe. So right now, we could call this all they want, and we're going to get a little message over here saying, wait a minute, the greeting user-defined function is not defined. So functions are usually defined down below, and we're going to do that right here. Let's see. We're going to define a function called greeting. And in order to define a function called greeting, let me put that up a little higher, we need a keyword. And just like variables use the let var or const, function, you ready for this? Uses the word function. So that indicates to JavaScript that, hey, we're going to define a function here, and now what has to happen next is the name comes afterwards, and right after the name, we need a set of parentheses. And notice once I did that, the color in the IDE changed. So now JavaScript already is picking it up in a different format and saying, hey, I know, You see the boxes around greeting here, and I know, hey, this is where you're calling it, so these must be related somehow. Okay, now, the parentheses, again, are available to us if we want to add more dynamic information. At this point now, let's just keep it blank, so no parameters at all here. We're going to hit space and then open curly brackets, and notice the partnering close comes up. Now what that means is you now have a space to write any code you want. So let's actually define a variable inside of this block, and we're going to define the variable Michael, the string data type, and we're going to give that or assign it to the variable name. And then we're going to ask, upon calling, we want this function to return a value to the caller. And that simply means once we're done processing this, or this might be part of the processing, this is what's going to be returned. Now, whether it's retained or not depends on whether we use it inside of other code or store it in a variable or so on. But what we're going to return here is a string with concatenation, and we'll explain concatenation in a minute. So we're going to put hello, comma, my name is, and then I'm going to leave a space and move outside of the quotes. So I have a string, hello, my name is. I'm going to move outside of the quotes because I want the string to be done. I'm going to hit a space and then plus, and then request that JavaScript actually use the variable name, meaning whatever is held inside of that container. Okay, so what should happen here? Upon calling greeting, I should see hello, my name is, and then whatever's stored in there, so it should be Michael. Okay, so a couple of things here. What you're seeing here with the plus bar, that operator with strings, it's called concatenation. There are other ways of doing this. Later on in the course, we'll talk about string literals, which are nice and handy to do, but for now we'll just deal with the straight up concatenation like you see on the screen. And that simply means we could put dynamic variables within and or functions within a string and make it work together like we are here. So we're expecting a sentence to say, hello, my name is Michael. All right, let's save that. So another thing that's going to happen here is, notice now greeting, when I click on the yellow, the call up top also gets identified with a small rectangle around it, so they know they're linked. Let's see. The call comes first. Traditionally, putting functions in this fashion, defining a function, JavaScript is using something called hoisting. So when it sees the greeting in parentheses, it will look down below and kind of temporarily push up the definition of greeting first prior to running this actual execution in console.log. So it's a lot of big definitions, but let's just see what happens to our screen here. So I've saved it, refresh my screen here. I want to call up our dev tools. There we go. Let's head on over to our console. And there it is. Hello, my name is, and Michael instead of name. So it concatenated for us. It literally executed the code for us. It ran the log function. Then it ran the greeting function inside. So that's another powerful thing about functions. You could have functions within functions, and quite honestly, this is what we have here. So greeting is the function, and we came down here and it ran the 2 lines of code. It assigned Michael to name and then added that to the string concatenation and returned the value. Okay, so a couple of things here of caution. We're just as this is for academic purposes. You want to make sure that the intent here with the variable name, that is a local variable to this greeting block of code only. We would not be able to use it outside. So if you wanted to use that variable outside, you'd set it up globally at the top of your code, but we'll see that in a couple of our projects. Okay. Okay, up next on the screen, I added lines 13 to 15 on here. with the comment invoking or calling the function full name. Now, when you call on a function, you can use it within another function, or in this circumstance, we are assigning it to a variable. And the it that we are assigning to is whatever happens after we call full name. This is the name of the function, full name. Whatever is returned as a result of running that function will be assigned to the variable formal name. And then we're just going to console.log formal name. But once again, take a look over here. Full name is not defined, so we're going to have to actually define that function first. Okay, now take a look on my line 20. So, line 20, we're defining a function full name, but with parameters. So that's the key here. So what does that mean? So we started off with the keyword on line 21 function, so JavaScript Engine now knows that we want a block of code given a name. We gave this block of code the name full name. That's what we're going to call it. And if I click on that just momentarily, notice that in the call or invocation of the method up on line 14, full name, that reference also has a subtle rectangle around it to show you that they are linked. Now watch what happens here. Full name, then open parentheses, and we're passing in something called parameters. Now these parameters are temporary placeholders or generic placeholders that we want to use. However, we want to give the person or the client calling the function kind of control over what goes in those placeholders. All right. So notice what's going to return here. One concatenated statement. My name is, then a space to allow for that to show up like a sentence, and then the quote ends, and then we begin concatenating, plus first name, plus, and then notice another string, and the string, we're just capturing a space to place between the first name and the last name, and then outside of the quotes, plus last name. So now the user is going to have the ability to place first and last name once they call this. And it is written once, but any user could use it for their name. Now, up on line 14, take a look at what name we're actually using. So, first name is Ada, last name is Lovelace. So, now the parameters have been filled in, and this is what's called an argument. We're passing an argument through the call of the full name. The call will then look down for the definition, we'll run the block of code, and we're all set. We're console.logging that to formal name. So let's take a look and see what this looks like on the console. We're going to refresh the screen here, and the hello, my name is Michael is coming up, but then there it is, my name is Ada Lovelace. And that is coming from our console.log formal name. So a couple of things here. We ran or called a function full name with arguments Ada, Lovelace. The data types are strings, and the function definition was down on line 20 and 23. Now we could continually change and put another first and last name, and we will not have to rewrite lines 20 and 23. Okay. All right, so on the screen, I'm invoking or calling a function, and let's change this. We're calling the function sum. Now, I'm calling this function sum as a argument of console.log, but the function name is sum here. We have argument 7, 20, and as you can imagine, I probably want to add those two numbers together. But if you look over to the left-hand side, lines 18, 19, and 20 are saying, wait a minute, the function sum is not defined yet. So, notice we're calling sum on 3 different lines with 3 different pairs of parameters. All we need to do is write the function once. So, coming up on line 24, we are defining, let me put that down on 25 there. Okay, so now on line 25, we're defining a function sum with parameters. Now take a look here. Here is sum, and it's being called on line 18, 19, and 20, and you can see once I click on the function definition, you see the rectangles coming up. Arguments are 7, 20, 5, negative 20, 1700, 500. Those are the arguments for 3 separate different calls to the function named sum. I only have to write it once. But when we write it, notice we start with the keyword function. That's in green. Sum is our definition name, and in parentheses we have generic placeholders called parameters for those arguments. And we're naming them num1 and num2, and that allows this block of code to be dynamic, which means the user defines what they put inside of those parentheses, and it will change every single time. But we only want to write it once. So we're keeping our code dynamic, we're not repeating ourselves. Inside of the block of code, remember, I'm using a local variable here. Not the best, it depends on your circumstances, but just for pure academic purposes here and showing how this works, we're setting up and initializing a variable called total, and we are summing num1 and num2. Then we're returning the string concatenation, the sum of, notice the space after of, then plus num1, plus, and then the spacing around and, plus num2 equals total. All right, so for example, when we call 7 and 20, this should print out the sum of 7 and 20 equals 27. Again, that will change when we call 5 and negative 20, but we do not have to rewrite the code all over again. So let's save that. Let's go over to our console.log and see if that actually works for us. And there we go. We've got our first 2 calls. Hello, my name is Michael. There's my name is Ada Lovelace. The sum of 7 and 20 equals 27. The sum of 5 and negative 20 equals negative 15. And the sum of 1700 and 500 equals 2200. So 3 separate distinct calls to that function sum. 3 different results, and all we had to do was write it once. We wrote it between lines 26 and 29. We wrote it with parameters. Remember, parameters are temporary placeholders of data that we want to integrate into our block of code, but we want to give the users, the person or the client calling that function, we want to give them control over what goes into parentheses. And once they call that, we call those arguments. All right, so that is it for a quick look at functions, probably one of the more powerful tools of any programming language. We're going to be using these all the time in our projects coming up. Thanks for stopping by. We will see you in the next one, everybody.